Welcome back to the Drag Racers Insurance Channel. Over the years, it's become apparent to me that a lot of racers think that their race car is covered when it's at their house. And to make a long story short, it's not covered. And today I'm going to show you why that's not the case. I have tried several times to make this video and it's been a little too long because the policy in effect is a homeowner's policy. It's a fun policy for a geek like me to teach, but it's also a very complex policy. So today I'm going to concentrate on just one part of the policy. There's other stuff that we're going to get into in future installments, but for today we're going to talk about the property, the race car itself, and also the trailer, your golf cart, etc. Now, a homeowner's policy is complex. There are all different forms and versions of it. They're all copyright protected, and in the comments section there's going to be a link to a standard policy that you can look at. But your policy is almost certainly going to be different than the policy in the links. However, there's a lot of similarities in policies, so I'm going to show you where to look to confirm the information in your own policy. There's 4 property coverages under a homeowner's. Coverage A is the dwelling, not the stuff inside, just the dwelling itself. Coverage B are appurtenant structures like a detached garage. Again, just the building, not the stuff inside. Coverage C is going to be the coverage that we discussed today. That is personal property, and that is basically property that's not real property. And the last coverage has nothing to do with us. That is extra expense coverage should you have a covered loss and need to live elsewhere. Now, under coverage C, every policy I've ever seen has 2 lists. List number 1 is property that's not covered at all by the policy. List 2 is called special limits of liability. This is stuff where there is coverage, but there's a limited amount of coverage because the makers of the policies feel that the average policyholder is not going to have a lot of this type of material, for example, jewelry, gold bullion, etc. But let's go back to property that's not covered. Now I'm going to put on my glasses because I'm going to read to you one of the exceptions. Property not covered includes motor vehicles. This includes their accessories, equipment, and parts. That's pretty simple. Now, in this particular form, there's an exception to that exclusion, and that basically says if the accessory or the equipment is not on or in the motor vehicle, it would be covered. So you could read that as saying, well, if I have my transmission out of the car and it's on the floor, it would be covered. We're going to get to that in a minute. I think that is a correct interpretation, but it's only for equipment that's out of the car. And most importantly, most homeowners forms that I have seen do not have that exception to the exclusion. In other words, they do not cover motor vehicles, equipment, parts at all. That's your homework, number 1. That's something you need to look up. Now, before we get back to that, we're going to get over to the other list, the list being special limits of liability. Hence, I have to put my glasses back on. There's 3 that apply to us. Number 1 is there is some coverage on trailers or semi-trailers not used with watercraft. So there is coverage, but there's only, in this policy form, $1,500. There's generally going to be not much coverage. Really what it's meant for is for people with small trailers that they use to do dump runs or take their lawnmower around, etc., etc. And so $1,500 isn't going to buy you much of a race trailer. In other words, if you have a $1,500 trailer for your race car, you're probably not even going to be watching this video. Now, there's another pair of coverages, and that is for business personal property. And you're like, this isn't a business, this is my race car. Yeah, it is a business. We race for money. You don't have to make money to be in business. Now, there's two limits, and there's one for business personal property on the premises and one for personal property, business personal property off the premises. On the premises, the limit is $2,500. Off the premises, it drops to $500. Now, this isn't motor vehicles, but it's your other stuff. It could be stuff in your trailer like tools, your weather station, a PC, projects, fuel jugs, etc. $500 isn't much coverage. I'm going to tell you a couple of claim stories in a minute about actual claims that have happened to my customer. Now, to get back to the motor vehicle exclusion, by the way, there are a couple of exceptions to that, but neither really is going to apply to you as a racer. Exception number one is there is some coverage for a vehicle, motor vehicle, that's used only for the maintenance of your covered property, i.e., a riding lawnmower. Okay, there's also coverage for vehicles that are used to assist the handicapped, i.e. a Darrell Gwynn style wheelchair. They're very narrow exceptions. By the way, we're only talking about property coverage. We're not going to get into liability coverage today. To keep this short and it's complex, we're going to get into this in a future installment. Now I'm going to tell you two claim stories to illustrate the points. Number one, many years ago, I had a gentleman that had called me for a quote on a racing operation. He didn't take the quote, and lo and behold, his trailer caught on fire on the way home, burned to the ground. I felt really bad for the guy, and I tried to help him collect whatever insurance he could. And he was able to get some coverage under the homeowners. So we were able to get some limited coverage for the trailer. But again, we were talking about business personal property. They basically had him itemize all the stuff in the trailer that wasn't the race car, that wasn't covered. But what they tried to do was really be nice about business personal property. So anything that was used only for the race car, for example, a torque wrench, a feeler gauge, that was business personal property, came under the limit. Anything that he had in the trailer that could have been used both at the house and for the business, like chairs, maybe an awning, stuff like that, his Tupperware, that was covered under the general contents limits. However, there wasn't very much coverage there. I do recall that the total loss was about $120,000, and insurance, all of his insurance that he was able to muster, gave him about $10,000. So, yeah, I am trying to scare you. that is probably what would happen, and not every company would be so liberal in the business personal property definition. So be aware of that. Also, getting back to the same thing, I had a client long ago, not a racer, who had his detached garage burned down one night with both of his cars in it. The reason was a rodent chewing through the wiring. That was the guilty party. We don't believe the rodent survived the fire. The garage did not. His house almost didn't, and his cars did not. But there were two pieces. Now, this was a big claim, a big recovery. It was over $100,000. But there were two things that I recall that weren't paid. The first thing is that being in Connecticut, the gentleman had a pair of snow tires on spare wheels that he used, and those were not covered. Again, those were car parts. Also, he had an older motorcycle that was in the garage for restoration someday. That too, being a motor vehicle and for regular use, was not covered. So that was a very small amount compared to the total. But I wanted to tell you that to give you an example of how a company interprets those exclusions. So, before we end, a word from our sponsor. All insurance information in these videos is based on knowledge of standard forms and coverages. But please note there are 10,000 insurance companies doing business in the United States, and a number of them have non-standard forms and coverages. In addition to which, forms and coverages change over time to keep up with the times. So, please contact your own agent or company to confirm if the information in this video applies to you and your coverages. If you have further questions, please put them in the comments section down below and I'll do my best to answer them. And of course, if you'd like a quote for your race car and trailer, please contact us at Drag Racers Insurance at 203-274-8954 or Bill at hortonis.com, hortonis.com. Thank you for watching. Once again, please get your homeowners policy. Look up those two lists. Make sure they apply to you and see what the amounts are. In the very near future, we're going to do another segment on liability coverage because there really is no liability coverage for your race car or racing operation under your homeowner's policy as well. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content. We'll be back to you in the near future. Thank you.